The chandeliers above glimmered like captured stars, their light spilling over rows of polished tables dressed in ivory cloth. The string quartet played a soft waltz, and laughter swirled through the grand hall. To the other guests, it was just another wedding filled with joy. To me, it was supposed to be a moment of reconciliation, a chance to feel like part of my own family again. I walked slowly toward the reception, clutching the wrapped gift I had chosen with trembling hands. My heart was heavy yet hopeful. Tonight perhaps my son Daniel and his bride Sophia would look at me, not as a burden, not as a nuisance, but as a mother worthy of respect. I told myself this wasn't just another chapter in endless family drama stories, but maybe the beginning of healing. But even before I reached my table, the air shifted. Whispers rustled like dry leaves behind me. Faces turned, then quickly turned away. My seat wasn't near the front with family, it was pushed to the very back beside strangers who barely knew my name. I felt the burn of humiliation creep across my face. Then came the laughter, sharp, deliberate. Sophia's voice cut through the music, bright with cruelty. Who put her there? At least keep the old woman out of the photographs. Every eye turned. Every whisper was a dagger. My fingers tightened on the edge of the tablecloth, trying to steady myself. The scent of roses from the centerpiece mixed with the metallic taste of shame in my mouth. Just as I thought I would crumble under the weight of so many watching eyes, a small tug pulled at my sleeve. I turned, startled, and saw my grandson, his young face, pale eyes wide with urgency. He leaned close, voice no louder than a breath. "Grandma, check under the table." I froze. What could he mean? The music swelled, glasses clinked, but in that instant the world narrowed to his trembling hand pointing downward. My body stiffened, a shiver running the length of my spine. With shaky fingers, I let my hand slip beneath the white linen draped over the table. My palm brushed against something stiff, foreign, a thin envelope taped just out of sight. My breath caught as I tugged it free, hiding it quickly in my lap. For a heartbeat, I stared at it, plain, unmarked but heavy with dread. Around me, the hall carried on, forks striking china, bursts of laughter, the champagne cork bursting in celebration. But in my chest, silence thundered. I opened the flap with trembling hands, and what I found made my knees weak. Inside was a copy of property documents, my home, my name scratched and replaced, signatures forged with an elegance meant to deceive. I recognized the date. It was the afternoon Sophia had insisted I sign a simple form, smiling sweetly, assuring me it was for Daniel's work benefits. Now here it was, proof of betrayal hidden beneath a wedding table like a dirty secret. My heart pounded so hard I thought the guests could hear it over the music. Why here? Why tonight? Who had placed this under the table, and why did my grandson know? I glanced at him, his eyes wide with fear, as though he carried a truth too heavy for his young shoulders. Before I could whisper a word, Sophia's sharp laugh split the air again. She had noticed me fumbling. Her eyes, cold and gleaming, locked on mine. She raised her glass high and shouted loud enough for the entire hall to hear. Look at her, crawling under tables for scraps. Pathetic, isn't it? The laughter roared louder, rolling through the guests like a cruel tide. Some covered their mouths, others didn't bother. Heat scorched my cheeks. I clutched the envelope to my chest, feeling exposed, stripped of dignity. Humiliation had a sound. It was the echo of glasses clinking in mockery, the whisper of dresses swishing away from me, the coughs that hid sneers. And in that moment I wondered, how many times must a mother be shamed before she finally breaks? I forced myself to sit straighter, though my insides quivered like shattered glass. Every eye lingered on me, their amusement cutting deeper than any blade. I wanted to vanish, to fold myself into the shadows of that grand hall, but I could not, because the envelope in my hands was more than paper. It was truth. My grandson leaned closer again, his voice barely audible. They said you'd never find it, but I wanted you to know. His innocence pierced me. In that trembling whisper he carried both guilt and love. I squeezed his small hand under the table, anchoring myself to the only loyalty I still had in that room. The master of ceremonies announced the next toast, his booming voice pulling attention back to the couple. Sophia smiled wide, her lips painted crimson, her eyes glinting with triumph as though she had already won. Daniel stood beside her, silent, a groom shackled by his own choices. I glanced again at the papers, my heart hammering with a rhythm that refused to quiet. The forged signature, the false witness stamp, the cold replacement of my name, every detail screamed of betrayal. And yet I was the one branded as pitiful, as useless. My throat tightened, words pressing but refusing to escape. How easy it would be to tear the envelope in two, to let the evidence scatter across the polished floor and expose everything here and now. But the weight of so many watching eyes pinned me down. I knew one wrong move, and Sophia would twist it to her advantage. I slipped the envelope back into my purse, my fingers trembling. I would not allow her the satisfaction of watching me unravel. Not tonight. The music swelled, guests clinked glasses, laughter rose again. To them it was a celebration. To me it was the opening act of another betrayal in a long chain of family drama stories. Stories that claw at your heart until you are left with nothing but scars. But scars can also be weapons. I lifted my chin, the humiliation burning in my veins, transforming into a quiet fire. They thought they had stripped me of dignity. They thought they had hidden their crimes beneath tablecloth and lies. But my grandson's whisper had pulled the curtain back. And now, though they laughed at me, I was already planning my next move. If you were in my place laughed at in front of an entire wedding hall, would you have stayed silent or exposed the truth right then? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to hear. The hall glittered with crystal and gold, but all I felt was the weight of eyes. Guests leaned close, whispering as though I couldn't hear. I caught fragments, poor old thing, still clinging on. She doesn't belong here. Each word dug into me, feeding the humiliation that had already scarred this evening. My seat tucked away at the farthest corner was both visible and invisible. Visible enough for ridicule, invisible enough to erase me from the family portrait. The irony was sharp. This was my son's wedding, and yet I was treated as an intruder. The servers passed by with silver trays offering champagne. I refused, though my throat was dry. My hand gripped the purse tighter, the envelope inside, pressing against my palm like a pulse, reminding me it was real. Reminding me this wasn't just another chapter in endless family drama stories, but the darkest one yet. Memories surged uninvited. The afternoon sunlight spilling through Sophia's kitchen window months ago, her smile sweet but too polished, too deliberate. "Just sign here, Mother," she had said. "For Daniel's insurance, nothing important." And foolishly blinded by the desire to believe her, I had signed without reading every word. Now the forged lines on the document before me told the truth I had ignored. She hadn't just tricked me, she had stolen my very name hidden beneath lace tablecloths and polished silverware. I lifted my gaze across the hall. Sophia sat beside Daniel at the head table, dazzling in her gown, every inch the adored bride. She leaned close to him, whispering. He nodded, his eyes fixed on his glass, never once glancing my way. That silence cut deeper than the laughter. Humiliation has many faces, a daughter-in-law's sneer, a son's silence, a room's collective smirk. I carried them all that night like stones in my chest, but the whisper of my grandson still echoed louder than the music. He had warned me, had guided me to the truth, and that truth demanded to be faced. The laughter around me rose like a tide, spilling over every fragile barrier I tried to build. A group of cousins, barely grown their ties, still crooked, whispered and pointed toward me. One of them mimicked my bent posture, another pressed fingers to her lips to stifle a laugh. Their cruelty wasn't born of malice but of permission. Sophia had opened the door and they walked through it gladly. I sat straighter, my spine rigid, though inside I trembled. The purse on my lap felt heavy, as though the papers inside carried the weight of every betrayal etched against me. The thought haunted me. If my grandson had not whispered, would I have left tonight in ignorance, smiling through a lie? The music shifted to a brighter tune, the kind played for grand entrances. All heads turned toward the ballroom doors, and Sophia seized the moment. She rose, glass in hand, her voice chiming sweetly for all to hear. "To family," she declared. "To loyalty, to building new lives together." The guests cheered, raising their glasses high. But her eyes, those sharp, mocking eyes, remained locked on me as the words dripped with venom. Every toast was a dagger dressed in sugar. Daniel lifted his glass too, though his hand trembled slightly. For a fleeting moment, his eyes met mine. I searched desperately for a sign of the boy I once held, the man who once said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll always protect you." But that boy was gone, buried beneath silence and compliance. The fire in my chest grew hotter. How long could I endure being paraded as the unwanted relic of my own family? How long before silence would suffocate me entirely? My fingers brushed the edge of the envelope again, the crackle of paper loud in my ears, though the room thundered with applause. And with that touch came clarity. Sophia's plan had not been born overnight. This was not impulse, it was calculation. Step by step, she had cornered me until all I had left was the illusion of belonging. But illusions break, and tonight perhaps hers would too. I leaned back in my chair, forcing my breathing to steady, though every laugh, every clink of glass seemed designed to crush me further. The hall shimmered with light, but to me it was a stage set for my humiliation. Sophia turned slightly, her gown catching the glow of chandeliers, and whispered something into Daniel's ear. His jaw tightened. He glanced toward me for a fleeting second before looking away, as though even eye contact might stain his perfect evening. That glance, that cowardly retreat, cut deeper than the harshest insult. And then the memory struck me with brutal clarity. Weeks before, Sophia had visited my house unannounced. She had walked through my rooms with the entitlement of ownership, her heels clicking against the wooden floors Ernest and I once polished together. She had paused before the framed photo of my wedding, her lips curling in amusement. "You really should think about the future, Mother," she'd said softly. "Houses like this, they need younger hands." At the time, I dismissed it as arrogance. But now, with the forged papers burning in my purse, I realized it was prophecy. The room erupted in cheers as the cake was rolled out, a tower of white sugar and flowers. Guests crowded around with phones lifted, eager to capture the perfect image. I stayed seated, invisible, a shadow at the edge of their celebration. But inside, I felt the first spark of defiance. They had hidden the evidence beneath a table, certain I would never find it. They had laughed at me, confident I would stay silent. But they had underestimated one thing: a mother humiliated is dangerous. A mother betrayed is unstoppable. I pressed my grandson's hand gently and whispered, "Thank you." His eyes, wide and fearful, softened with relief. He had risked much to warn me, and I would not let his courage be wasted. I lifted my gaze toward the head table, toward Sophia's smug smile, and Daniel's silent complicity. My humiliation tonight was not the end, it was the beginning. And though they toasted their new life, I silently vowed that their celebration would soon turn to ashes. What would you have done in my place? Stay silent to keep peace, or rise to expose the betrayal, even in the middle of the wedding? I'd love to hear your thoughts. The applause around the cake faded into chatter, the sound of forks scraping plates, the hum of polite conversation. But at my table, silence pressed against me like a second skin. My grandson stayed close, his small hand tucked into mine beneath the linen. His touch was warm, but his eyes carried a weight no child should bear. "Grandma," he whispered, leaning close. I heard them. "Last night, they said after the wedding, you'd be gone. They want to send you away." The words sliced through me sharper than Sophia's public jeers. My heart thudded painfully, each beat echoing with disbelief. "Gone," I mouthed, unable to form sound. My grandson nodded, his lip trembling. Images surged in my mind: sterile white rooms, locked doors, the hollow laughter of strangers. A nursing home far from the soil Ernest and I had nurtured, far from the house that carried the echoes of my life. To them, I was already buried, stripped of worth. I glanced toward the head table. Sophia laughed brightly, clinking her glass with Daniel's, their smiles a performance polished for the crowd. My son's eyes, though, betrayed a storm, flashes of unease, then resignation. Still, he said nothing. His silence once again was an answer. The humiliation deepened, swelling like a tide determined to drown me. I felt it in the way guests shifted their chairs away from mine, in the pitying glances that cloaked cruelty. They were already rewriting my story, painting me as the frail matriarch too weak to fight back. But I was not weak. I was a woman carved by grief, tempered by betrayal, standing inside yet another chapter of family drama stories where mothers are cast aside for convenience. And I knew with burning certainty that I would not allow their ending to become mine. I squeezed my grandson's hand firmly, a silent vow: they may have the crowd's laughter tonight, but I would have the truth tomorrow. I sat there, spine rigid, while the laughter and music swirled like a storm around me. Yet every sound only sharpened the words my grandson had whispered. "They want to send you away." For a moment I drifted back to the morning after Ernest's funeral. The house had smelled of lilies left too long in their vases, the air heavy with grief. Sophia had walked in without knocking, her heels striking the floor with ownership. She had leaned against the kitchen counter, her tone laced with syrup. "You'll be more comfortable somewhere quiet, away from all this responsibility. Daniel and I will take care of everything." At the time, I thought it was an offer. Now I saw it for what it truly was: a sentence. The master of ceremonies tapped the microphone, calling for attention. "It's time for family speeches," he announced cheerfully. Would the mother of the groom like to say a few words? The spotlight swung toward me, blinding in its glare. My breath caught. Before I could rise, Sophia's voice rang out, "Oh, no need for that. She's had enough attention tonight." The guests chuckled. Some clapped politely at the joke. But I felt my body stiffen as though nails had been driven into the chair, my chance to speak stolen as casually as one steals a glass from a table. I caught Daniel's eye, pleading silently. "Say something. Defend me." A single word would do. But he lowered his gaze, his lips pressed tight, and drank from his glass instead. The humiliation seared hotter, layered upon the mockery, the whispers, the envelope in my purse. It built like thunder before a storm pressing against the walls of my chest, and still my grandson held my hand beneath the table. That small, fragile grip kept me from shattering. His courage reminded me that silence would only let their lies bloom. They believed they had written my ending already, but the story wasn't theirs to write. The applause carried on without me as though I were nothing more than furniture in the corner. I sat in the harsh glow of the chandelier, every crystal above me scattering light like shards of judgment. My hands gripped the purse so tightly that the edges of the envelope cut into my skin. Sophia stood gracefully, her gown shimmering like a weapon. She raised her glass again, her voice lilting with mock sweetness. "Let's drink," she announced, to leaving behind the old and celebrating the new. The room laughed and cheered, oblivious to the cruelty braided into her words. But I felt each syllable strike deliberate and sharp. Leaving behind the old, that was me. I pressed my lips together, fighting the trembling that wanted to betray me. My grandson shifted in his seat, his small body shielding mine as if he could take the blows himself. He leaned in, whispering one more time, "They said after tonight you won't be in the house anymore." Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but I forced them back. I would not give her that satisfaction. Not here. Not in front of an audience who already believed her version of me. I glanced around the hall, neighbors who had once borrowed sugar from my kitchen, relatives who had once sat at my table. Their eyes slid away now, choosing comfort over conscience, each a silent accomplice. I understood in that instant, humiliation is not just the sharpness of a single insult. It is the silence of the many who choose not to see. But I also understood something else. Humiliation, when endured, transforms into fuel. And tonight I had been given enough to set fire to every lie they had planted. I looked at Sophia once more, her laughter echoing under the chandeliers, her arm wrapped possessively around Daniel's. She thought she had won. But what she didn't know was that her triumph had been exposed, hidden not in shadows, but beneath a table uncovered by the courage of a child. I whispered to myself, almost a prayer, almost a vow, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." If you were the only one who knew the truth, surrounded by laughter that mocked you, would you reveal it at once, or wait for the right moment? Share your thoughts below. The clinking of glasses rang out again, but this time I did not shrink back. My fingers dug into the purse on my lap, feeling the sharp corner of the envelope press against my skin like a blade waiting to be unsheathed. Sophia, radiant in her gown, leaned into the microphone, her smile sugar-sweet, her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "Some people don't know when it's time to step aside," she declared, laughter rising from her chosen audience. "But tonight isn't about the past, it's about the future." The words stung, but they also cleared the fog in my mind. Enough. Slowly, I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against the polished floor silenced the nearest tables. I rose, every bone in my body trembling, but my voice when it came was steady. "Then let's speak of the future," I said, loud enough for the microphone to catch. Gasps fluttered through the hall. Sophia's smile froze brittle as glass. Daniel's hand jerked at his side, but he did not move to stop me. I walked toward the center, each step heavy with the weight of years of silence. My heart pounded, but the humiliation that had chained me melted into a strange, fierce clarity. For too long I had let them write my story. Tonight I would reclaim it. I reached the head table, standing before Sophia. My grandson trailed a few steps behind, his small face pale with both fear and courage. I placed the purse on the tablecloth, the envelope visible beneath my hand. "Marriage is built on honesty," I said, meeting Sophia's eyes. "But dishonesty? Dishonesty has been hiding under this very table." The hall erupted into murmurs, confusion rippling across every row of guests. Some leaned forward eagerly, others whispered nervously. The wedding was no longer theirs to celebrate, it was mine to expose. Sophia's laugh came sharp and brittle, slicing through the murmurs. "Oh, please," she sneered, her voice dripping venom. "She's confused. Maybe she picked up a lost receipt and thinks it's important." The crowd chuckled uneasily, caught between loyalty to the bride and curiosity for scandal. My chest tightened, but I forced my trembling hands to stay steady. I drew the envelope from my purse and laid it flat on the tablecloth, the bold letters of the property title visible for all who cared to look. Confused, I said, my voice low but cutting through the noise. I know my own signature, and I know when it has been forged. The murmurs swelled into gasps. Guests shifted in their seats, craning their necks to see. The chandelier light glinted off 100 curious eyes, all fixed on us. Daniel rose halfway from his chair, his lips parting, but Sophia's nails dug into his wrist, anchoring him down. His mouth shut with a snap, and once again he became a silent accomplice. That silence was more humiliating than her words. Sophia leaned closer, lowering her voice so only I could hear. You think you'll win sympathy, old woman. You'll only embarrass yourself. No one here will side with you. Her whisper stung, but I straightened, letting the microphone catch my words this time. Embarrass myself, I said louder. No. Tonight I expose betrayal. Not just for me, but for my grandson who deserves to know the truth about his family. At that, the boy stepped closer, his small figure now visible beside me. His presence drew more gasps than my words. A child siding with his grandmother against the bride, it was a sight no guest would soon forget. Whispers surged through the hall like wildfire. The celebration had fractured. No longer laughter, no longer harmony. The wedding had turned into a stage for truth, and humiliation now spread not toward me but toward the ones who sought to destroy me. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the clink of a glass someone nervously set down. Sophia's face hardened, her smile gone, her mask cracking under the weight of so many watching eyes. You're ruining their wedding, she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Can't you see how pathetic this is? I turned slowly, facing the rows of guests, neighbors, relatives, colleagues, people who had once borrowed from my pantry, who had once eaten at my table. Their stares were no longer filled with laughter. They were waiting, watching. Pathetic, I said, my voice resonating through the microphone. Pathetic is forging a widow's name. Pathetic is plotting to throw a mother into the shadows while you celebrate in stolen light. The murmurs became a rumble. A woman in the second row covered her mouth, whispering fiercely to her husband. Someone at the back stood to see better. The hall had shifted, no longer Sophia's stage but mine. Daniel's face blanched. His eyes darted between me, the papers on the table, and the restless crowd. He opened his mouth, but once again, no words came. His silence was a verdict all its own. Sophia lunged forward, trying to snatch the envelope from beneath my hand, but I pressed it flat against the cloth. No, I said firmly. You've hidden long enough. This will not vanish under a table again. The law will decide. Gasps rippled across the hall. Phones were raised now, flashes sparking as guests began to record. My humiliation had become their spectacle, but this time it was no longer my shame. It was her exposure. I gathered the envelope and my grandson close, turning my back on Sophia's seething rage. For the first time that evening I felt taller than the chandeliers above me. The future she mocked me with would not be hers to dictate. If you were standing in my place, would you have revealed the evidence at the wedding or waited for the courtroom? Share your thoughts. I want to know. The air outside the hall was colder than I expected, sharp against my flushed cheeks. The laughter and music still bled through the doors behind me, muffled but mocking, as though the celebration had resumed without pause. To them I was nothing more than a disruption swiftly forgotten. But I wasn't forgotten. Whispers trailed out with the guests who slipped into the night for fresh air, their eyes darting toward me, their mouths buzzing with scandal. My humiliation had become their entertainment, another tale to carry home. Yet beneath their curiosity lay something else, doubt. And doubt was dangerous for Sophia. I clutched the envelope to my chest, my grandson pressed against my side. He looked up at me with wide eyes, fear and pride warring in his small frame. Did I do the right thing, Grandma? He asked. I bent low, pressing my lips to his hair. You saved me, I whispered. Never doubt that. The crunch of footsteps approached, steady and sure. I turned to see a man in a dark suit, his expression calm but eyes sharp. Stephen Callahan, attorney advocate, the man I had once called upon in Ernest's final days to review our will. He gave me a short nod as though summoned not by chance but by inevitability. I saw enough, he said simply, his gaze flicking to the envelope. And I heard more than I needed from inside. You're not alone in this. The weight on my chest loosened. For the first time that night I felt something beyond humiliation. I felt the stir of resolve. Stephen guided us to a quieter corner, away from the eyes of the crowd. He slid a recorder from his pocket, his movements practiced. Tell me everything he instructed, from the papers to what the boy overheard. Every detail matters now. I inhaled deeply, steadying my voice as I recounted the whispers, the forged signature, the cruel laughter. My grandson spoke too, his small voice trembling but clear, repeating the words he had overheard. After tonight, she won't be in the house anymore. Stephen's jaw tightened, his pen scratching across a notepad. That's not just theft, he said. That's conspiracy. The night wind tugged at the edges of my shawl as Stephen leaned closer, his voice low but steady. This isn't just a family dispute anymore, he said. This is fraud. If we move quickly, the court can freeze any transfer of property before Sophia makes her next move. The word court rang inside me like a bell. Images collided: Sophia's laughter under chandeliers, Daniel's silence, the envelope hidden beneath a wedding table. For years I had endured humiliation in silence. But now silence would be her undoing, not mine. My grandson squeezed my hand, his small fingers strong despite his fear. "Grandma," he whispered, "will they listen to me? I'm just a kid." Stephen crouched to his level, his voice warm yet firm. "Sometimes the truth sounds clearest from a child. You saw what others tried to hide. That makes you the strongest witness in this room." The boy's eyes widened, a flicker of courage pushing through his worry. I pulled him close, heart aching at the weight he carried, but grateful for his bravery. Behind us, the muffled music swelled again. They were probably cutting the cake, toasting with champagne, pretending nothing had happened. But I knew better. I had lived long enough to understand how family drama stories twist and turn, how betrayal hides behind toasts and polite smiles. Tonight was proof, and this time I would not leave without fighting back. Stephen straightened, slipping the envelope into his leather case. "Tomorrow we meet at my office. I'll file the motion immediately. You'll need to be ready to stand before the judge." The thought made my stomach tighten. Courtrooms were not places of comfort. They were arenas of judgment where eyes could strip you bare just as cruelly as a wedding crowd. But this time the humiliation would not belong to me. I looked toward the grand hall one last time. Through the glass doors I saw Sophia on the dance floor, radiant and laughing as though victory were hers. Daniel hovered at her side, a puppet bound by silence. Yet even through the music and lights I sensed a shift. Guests whispered more than they danced. Scandal had already taken root. The parking lot was nearly empty when Stephen walked me to my car. The night stretched wide and silent, but my heart beat with the noise of everything that had just unfolded. The humiliation I had endured inside that hall no longer clung to me like chains. It sharpened me, cut me into someone unrecognizable even to myself. "Remember this," Stephen said, his tone steady. "In court, it won't just be your word against hers. You have the document, the witness, and the motive. That's stronger than any performance Sophia can put on." I nodded, though the thought of standing in front of a judge still made my throat tighten. Yet I knew this was no longer about me alone. It was about my grandson who had whispered truth into my ear when no one else dared. It was about Ernest's memory, his years of work nearly erased by fraud. And it was about every mother cast aside in cruel family drama stories written out of their own homes by the hands of those they once trusted most. As I helped my grandson into the car, I caught his reflection in the window, his small shoulders squared, his jaw clenched as though he carried more than his years. He was watching me, waiting to see if I would falter. I couldn't. Not anymore. We drove away from the glittering hall, leaving behind the music, the laughter, and Sophia's hollow triumph. But I knew she would not sleep peacefully that night. Scandal had a way of slipping into the cracks of even the most perfect evening, and tonight I had planted it firmly at her feet. When I pulled into my driveway, I paused, staring at the house that still bore my name, though she had tried to steal it. The porch light flickered, casting shadows across the steps Ernest once climbed with tired feet after long days. I whispered a promise into the quiet night. "They will not take this from me. Not while I breathe." Stephen closed his notebook with finality. "Tomorrow we begin. Sophia thinks she humiliated you in front of the world. Let her laugh tonight. Tomorrow the law will wipe the smile from her face." For the first time in years, I felt strength return to my spine. Humiliation had given birth to defiance, and now defiance would carry me into battle. If your family turned a celebration into a stage for betrayal, would you fight back immediately or wait for the courtroom to strike? Tell me what you think. I'd love to know. The courthouse buzzed like a hive, voices overlapping, footsteps echoing down the marble floors. By the time I stepped through the double doors, the benches were already filled, neighbors, distant relatives, even reporters clutching notebooks and cameras. My humiliation at the wedding had become their headline, their morning gossip, their entertainment. I kept my head high, though, my stomach twisted. Each face I passed carried its own judgment, pity, doubt, curiosity. Yet beneath them all, I saw something else: anticipation. They wanted a show, and Sophia was ready to give them one. She entered moments later, her gown replaced by a fitted suit, the color of ash, her hair swept back with elegance. She carried herself like a queen, betrayed her chin, tilted, her expression painted with just the right measure of sorrow. The murmurs rose instantly. Poor thing, imagine being humiliated on your wedding night. That old woman must be jealous. Daniel walked beside her, his hand at her back, his face pale and stiff. He avoided my eyes as though I were a ghost. That hurt worse than any rumor. Stephen Callahan placed a steadying hand on my arm, guiding me forward. Remember, he whispered, truth doesn't need theater. It needs clarity. We took our seats at the plaintiff's table, the envelope and its forged contents secured in Stephen's leather case. The judge entered, the gavel struck, and silence rolled across the room. Case of Carter versus Carter, the clerk announced. The words echoed in my ears. Family against family. Blood against blood. Sophia leaned into Daniel, her lips brushing his ear. Even from across the room, I recognized the gesture control disguised as affection. Daniel nodded, his silence once again her shield. Stephen rose, his voice measured. Your Honor, we present evidence that my client's property documents were falsified. The forged signature was not just an attempt at theft, it was a conspiracy to strip her of her home and her dignity. Gasps rippled through the benches. The drama that had begun at a wedding table was now laid bare in court, another chapter in the long chain of family drama stories that never seemed to end. The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze sharp. And your evidence? Stephen placed the envelope on the table, its weight echoing louder than words. All eyes turned toward it. The judge leaned forward as Stephen unfolded the documents, sliding them across the polished wood. The courtroom hushed, the silence broken only by the shuffle of papers. These signatures, Stephen said, tapping the ink with his pen, are not my client's. They were forged. The notary stamp was falsified. And the timing coincides exactly with the defendant's wedding preparations. Sophia laughed, sharp and theatrical, her voice ringing across the room. Forged, please. She's confused, old, desperate for attention. These family drama stories she clings to are nothing but her imagination. A ripple of laughter and whispers spread through the benches. I felt heat crawl up my neck, humiliation flaring again. But this time I refused to bow. I rose slowly, my hands steady on the table. Imagination, I said, my voice cutting through the din. Was it my imagination when you hid these papers under your wedding table? Was it my imagination when my grandson whispered the truth to me? The room stilled. All eyes turned to the small boy at my side. His face flushed, but his gaze was brave. He gripped the wooden rail, his small knuckles white. Sophia's eyes flickered fear, quick and fleeting, but then her mask returned. She turned to the judge, feigning outrage. You cannot possibly take the word of a child. He doesn't understand what he saw or heard. But the silence of the courtroom betrayed her. Everyone understood. A child's honesty carried more weight than her polished lies. Daniel shifted uneasily beside her, his collar tugged as though it strangled him. For a moment, his eyes lifted toward me, glassy and conflicted. He looked away just as quickly, trapped between loyalty and guilt. Stephen stepped forward again, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, the witness is not here to fabricate. He is here to confirm what was already concealed. And his words may be the purest truth you'll hear in this courtroom. The judge raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. Then let us hear him. All eyes swung to my grandson. His lips parted, but no sound came yet. The weight of the room pressed on his small frame, yet I squeezed his hand gently, willing my strength into him. The courtroom air thickened as my grandson rose to his feet. His small figure looked fragile beneath the towering windows, yet the hush that fell across the benches gave him a weight greater than any adult in the room. He glanced at me, his lips trembling. I nodded once, slow and steady. It's all right, I whispered. Just tell them what you told me. His voice came soft at first, but clear. I heard them. Sophia and Daniel. They said after the wedding Grandma wouldn't live in the house anymore. They said they'd put her away. The words struck the room like thunder. Gasps erupted, people shifting forward, the gavel pounding for silence. Sophia's face drained of color, her practiced mask cracking into something raw and ugly. That's a lie, she shrieked, her voice breaking. Children imagine things. You can't. But her outburst only deepened the doubt. The murmurs grew louder, reporters scribbling furiously, neighbors exchanging looks heavy with suspicion. For years, Sophia had charmed them with her polished smile. Now her rage betrayed her. I sat straighter, watching the balance shift. For so long I had been the target of humiliation, mocked and silenced, but in this moment it was she who burned beneath the eyes of the community. The judge rapped his gavel once more. Order. This court will not decide on emotion but on evidence and testimony. The child's words will be heard, and the documents will be examined. Stephen leaned toward me, his voice low. This is the turning point. You've endured their laughter, now let the truth carry you. I met Sophia's gaze across the room. Her chest rose and fell with fury, her knuckles white against the table. For the first time, it was she who trembled, not me. And I knew then, humiliation could be survived, but exposure could not be undone. If you had been the child in that courtroom, would you have spoken the truth in front of everyone, or kept silent out of fear? Share your thoughts, I'd love to know. The courtroom buzzed like a storm breaking. My grandson's words still echoed, fragile yet piercing, shaking the silence that had once protected Sophia. Neighbors leaned forward, reporters scribbled, and even the bailiff's eyes widened as though the truth itself had entered the room. Sophia sprang to her feet, her composure shattering. "He's a child," she cried, her voice shrill. "You can't trust him. Children imagine monsters under their beds, they twist what they hear." The judge struck the gavel sharply. "Sit down, Mrs. Carter. You will not interrupt." But Sophia couldn't contain herself. She turned on Daniel, her hands clutching his arm. "Tell them," she hissed. "Tell them it isn't true." "Say it," Daniel froze, his face pale. The entire courtroom held its breath. For years he had been her shield, her silent accomplice. Now the weight of her demand pressed against him, visible in the twitch of his jaw, the sweat along his hairline. I watched him, my heart clenched. My son, the boy who once held my hand on the first day of school, who once promised to protect me, was trapped between his wife's rage and his mother's truth. He opened his mouth, but the words faltered. His eyes darted toward me, then downward, shame burning across his face. He said nothing. The silence was louder than any denial. Gasps rippled through the benches. The tide was turning. I could feel it in the air, in the way eyes no longer pitied me but judged her. This was no longer just one of those family drama stories whispered behind closed doors. This was truth exposed in front of all. Sophia's lips trembled, her mask cracking further. For the first time, she looked small beneath the gaze of the court. Sophia's voice cracked as she tried to recover, but the tremor betrayed her. "You're all being deceived," she shouted, her hands flailing as if she could swat the truth from the air. "This old woman has poisoned her own grandson's mind. She tells him stories, family drama stories, twisted into lies. You can't let a child's fantasy ruin my life." Her outburst rippled through the benches like a stone thrown into water. Some gasped, others frowned. A few exchanged whispers that cut louder than shouts. "She's losing control. She's afraid." The judge's gavel struck once more. "Order, Mrs. Carter. If you cannot compose yourself, I will have you removed from this courtroom." Sophia's face flushed crimson. She collapsed back into her chair, her breath sharp, her eyes darting wildly as though searching for an escape. Daniel sat rigid beside her, but I saw the fracture in his mask. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembling on the table. When he finally lifted his eyes to meet mine, I saw torment, regret. The walls of his silence were crumbling. For the first time, I glimpsed the son I had lost to her control. Stephen seized the moment, his voice cutting through the tension. "Your Honor, the defense dismisses the child's testimony as fantasy, but what if I could show you evidence that matches his words, evidence no child could invent?" The judge adjusted his glasses, intrigued. "Proceed." Stephen turned, signaling to the bailiff. A folder was handed over, thick with photographs. He laid them on the judge's bench one by one, their glossy surfaces catching the courtroom lights. My breath caught. Even from a distance, I recognized them, images from the wedding, candid shots taken by guests. And there in one frame was Sophia herself, sliding something beneath the table with a sly smile. Gasps erupted. The courtroom tipped into chaos. The photographs passed from hand to hand, each gasp louder than the last. Neighbors who had once laughed at Sophia's jokes now stared at the glossy truth with disbelief. Even the reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously, their cameras clicking in bursts. Sophia's composure shattered completely. "This proves nothing," she cried, slamming her palms on the table. I was fixing the decorations. That's all, anyone can see that, but the images betrayed her. The angle of her body, the furtive glance over her shoulder, the envelope half hidden in her hand, it all screamed guilt. No words could polish the stain. The judge's voice cut through the uproar. Enough. The photographs will be admitted into evidence. Alongside the testimony and the documents already presented, the court has more than enough to consider. Sophia collapsed into her chair, her hands clawing at the edge of the table. Her lips moved soundlessly, but no excuses came. Daniel stared at the photos, his face pale as parchment. His hand twitched toward them as though reaching for proof that his loyalty had been misplaced all along. I sat still, watching. For so long I had been the one humiliated, mocked at the wedding, silenced at the table, erased from my own family. Now it was she who bore the weight of 100 eyes, each one judging, each one condemning. Humiliation, when turned, is a mirror. And tonight she finally saw her reflection. The judge leaned back, his expression grave. This court will reconvene tomorrow for final arguments. Until then, the evidence stands. The gavel struck, echoing through the chamber like a drumbeat of inevitability. As the crowd erupted into whispers, I felt my grandson's hand slip into mine once more. "You're winning, Grandma," he whispered, his small voice steady with hope. I pressed his hand gently. "No," I whispered back, my gaze fixed on Sophia's crumbling mask. "Truth is winning. If you saw undeniable evidence of betrayal, would you forgive or would you fight until justice was done? Share your thoughts with me, I truly want to hear." The courthouse was even more crowded the next morning. Reporters lined the steps outside, cameras flashing as we approached. Strangers who had never spoken my name now whispered it like a headline, their eyes following me not with pity but with curiosity and something dangerously close to respect. Inside, the benches overflowed. The air hummed with anticipation. Today would not be quiet. Today the mask would either hold or shatter completely. Sophia entered moments later, her carefully constructed armor different from yesterday. She wore softer colors, now her makeup lighter, her eyes painted red as though from sleepless tears. She clutched Daniel's arm tightly, her posture screaming fragility. She wanted the world to see her as the victim. When she sat, she dabbed at her eyes with a folded handkerchief. Her voice broke as she spoke to the judge. "Your Honor, I am the one who has suffered. Imagine being slandered on your wedding day in front of everyone you love. These accusations, they're tearing my marriage apart. This isn't justice. This is cruelty." Gasps rippled, but fewer than before. Many eyes rolled, lips pressed thin. The photographs from yesterday were burned into memory. No tears could erase them. Stephen leaned close to me, murmuring, "She's changing tactics. When rage fails, she plays the saint. But the cracks are too deep now." I nodded, though my pulse quickened. Her performance was polished, each word rehearsed. And yet when she glanced at me, her eyes gleamed with venom. Those weren't tears of grief, they were weapons. The judge listened, patient but unmoved. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "this court weighs evidence, not theater. Keep your testimony to facts." The subtle shift in the room was unmistakable. Yesterday I had been the one ridiculed, the one silenced. Today Sophia's pleas fell flat, her act unraveling in the face of truth. And for the first time I saw Daniel's jaw tighten, not in silent agreement with her, but in conflict. His eyes flickered toward me, guilt and shame colliding behind them. The son I had thought lost was stirring. Sophia's sobs echoed in the chamber, but they sounded hollow, rehearsed. She clutched Daniel's sleeve as if it were a lifeline, her voice rising with desperation. "Please, Your Honor, don't let lies destroy our family. She's spinning family drama stories to make herself the victim. I love Daniel, I love this family, I would never harm them." Her words trembled with sweetness, but her eyes betrayed rage. She darted glances at me, daggers behind her tears. The benches stirred, restless. Neighbors whispered sharply, "If she loved them, why forge papers?" Another muttered, "I saw those photos. She's guilty." The tide had shifted. Sophia felt it too. Her hand clawed at Daniel's arm nails, pressing through the fabric. "Tell them," she hissed. "Tell them your mother is lying." Daniel flinched. For a moment he sat frozen, the boy I once cradled, buried under years of silence. Then his eyes lifted, meeting mine across the courtroom. The world seemed to hold its breath. I saw it: hesitation, conflict, and beneath it the flicker of truth. My son's lips parted as if to speak, but Sophia's hand tightened, pulling him back into silence. His jaw clenched shut again, his face paling. The judge's gavel struck. "Order in the court." His gaze pinned Sophia. "This is not your stage for emotion. Unless you have evidence to contradict the documents and testimony, you will remain silent." Sophia's mask shattered further. She rose, trembling, her voice cracking into a scream. "You don't understand. She's been manipulating everyone, even that boy. He's been brainwashed." The chamber erupted with gasps and disbelieving murmurs. No one believed her anymore. The more she shouted, the smaller she became. Humiliation, once my burden, now wrapped itself around her like chains. The room roared with whispers as Sophia's voice cracked against the walls. No amount of trembling hands or streaked mascara could undo the photographs, the forged signature, or the testimony of a child. She was unraveling thread by thread under the eyes of everyone she had once charmed. Reporters scribbled feverishly, flashes from cameras cutting across her face. Neighbors shook their heads, pity now reserved for me, not her. For the first time in years, I felt the tide of community shift to my side. Sophia clung to Daniel, her cries desperate. "Say something. Defend me!" But Daniel's hand slipped from hers. Slowly, almost painfully, he rose to his feet. His eyes swept across the courtroom over Sophia's pleading face, the judge's stern gaze, and finally mine. The silence was absolute. Even the scratch of pens paused. When he spoke, his voice was low, strained with years of silence, but it carried. "I can't keep quiet anymore." Gasps burst from the benches. Sophia's eyes widened, horror flashing like lightning across her face. She reached for him, but he stepped just out of her grasp. "Daniel," she choked, but the word collapsed in her throat. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, if you have testimony, the court will hear it." Daniel's chest rose and fell, his hands trembling at his sides. He looked once more at me, his mother, the woman he had abandoned in silence for too long. His lips parted, the weight of truth pressing against them. And then the gavel struck, calling a recess before he could finish. The cliffhanger left the room buzzing, the audience surging with whispers. What will he say? I sat frozen, my grandson's hand in mine. Sophia's mask was gone, and Daniel at last stood on the edge of truth. If your own child stood between truth and loyalty, do you believe he should protect his spouse or his mother? Share what you think, I want to hear. When the recess ended, the courtroom brimmed with restless energy. Reporters whispered into recorders, neighbors craned their necks, and the air vibrated with the question on every tongue. What will Daniel say? The judge struck the gavel. Mr. Carter, you may continue your testimony. Daniel stood slowly, his shoulders hunched as though burdened by years of silence. His eyes flickered toward Sophia, then to me. The pull between us was visible, a rope fraying at both ends. His voice cracked. He swallowed hard. I know those documents. I know my mother's signature, and I know Sophia put them in front of her to sign documents that weren't what she claimed. Gasps rippled through the benches. Sophia shot up from her chair. Lies, she screamed, clutching his arm. Daniel, stop this, you're confused. But he shook her off, his voice growing steadier. No, I was there. I stayed silent because I thought it would protect us. But all it did was betray the woman who raised me. My breath caught. The words I had longed to hear, the recognition I thought would never come, spilled into the chamber at last. My son's voice carried not only to me, but to everyone who had once believed her story. Sophia's face twisted, rage piercing through her mask of sorrow. She whirled on the judge. You can't listen to this. He's biased. He's her son. This is nothing but family drama stories being dragged into a courtroom. But the more she protested, the more the crowd turned against her. Whispers grew sharper. She's desperate. He finally admitted it. She's losing. And for the first time, Sophia looked small. Daniel's words hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. The benches buzzed, neighbors, whispering, reporters scratching faster across their pads. For years, Sophia had owned the narrative, but in one moment her shield had splintered. Sophia clutched at his sleeve again, her voice shrill. You're destroying us. You're destroying me. After everything I've given you, this is how you repay me. Daniel shook his head, his voice steadier now. You didn't give Sophia. You took. You took from my mother, from me, from this family, and I let you. His throat tightened, but he pressed on. But I won't anymore. The room gasped again, a tide shifting irrevocably. For once, I did not bow my head in shame. I lifted it, meeting every gaze that turned toward me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was truth clawing its way into the light. The judge motioned for silence, but Sophia would not yield. She surged to her feet, her eyes wild, her hands trembling. He's lying. They're all lying. This old woman has poisoned everyone, spinning these family drama stories to make herself look noble. It's manipulation. Her scream cracked against the marble walls, echoing louder than she intended. Some in the benches covered their mouths to hide smirks. Others laughed outright, the sound sharp, humiliating. For once, the laughter wasn't aimed at me, it was aimed at her. Humiliation spread across Sophia's face, blotching her cheeks, making her tremble. She turned in a circle seeking sympathy but found only skepticism. The mask she had worn so carefully for years was gone, stripped bare by her own desperation. Daniel lowered his head into his hands, shoulders heaving with the weight of everything he had carried. But he did not retract his words. Not this time. Stephen stood calmly addressing the judge. Your Honor, the defense has exhausted theater and denial. The evidence is clear. The testimony is clear. What remains now is judgment. The judge's gavel struck once, demanding silence. The echoes rolled through the chamber like thunder, stilling even Sophia's ragged breath. This court is not here for shouting matches, the judge said sternly. We weigh evidence, not hysteria. And the evidence presented is substantial. Sophia sank back into her chair, her face streaked with ruined makeup, her chest rising and falling in angry bursts. She tried to glare at me, but the weight of the room pressed her down. Every eye that once adored her now judged her. Every whisper now belonged to me. Daniel remained standing, his voice quiet but resolute. I can't erase the years I stayed silent. But I can speak now. My mother is telling the truth, and I will stand by her. Tears burned my eyes, but I did not let them fall. Instead, I reached across the table, pressing my hand to the wood as if to steady the ground beneath us. My son's words at long last had returned him to me. The audience erupted in murmurs, some gasps, some claps quickly hushed. The judge lifted his gavel again. Order: this court will adjourn until closing arguments. Tomorrow we render judgment. The sound of the gavel's strike sealed the moment. Sophia sagged in her chair, her once perfect composure shattered, while Daniel stood torn but firm beside me. The reporters swarmed as soon as we rose, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. But for the first time, I did not lower my head. As we left the chamber, my grandson tugged at my sleeve. Grandma, does this mean it's almost over? I bent and kissed his hair. Not almost, my dear, but closer than ever. And in the silence that followed, I knew humiliation had birthed strength, and strength would birth justice. If you were in Daniel's place, torn between your spouse and your mother, who would you stand with when the truth finally came out? Share your thoughts below. The final day of court dawned gray, the sky heavy with clouds as though the heavens themselves waited to pass judgment. By the time I entered the courthouse, the steps outside were overflowing, reporters elbowing for space, neighbors murmuring, strangers clutching newspapers with my name on the front page. Inside, the courtroom brimmed with tension. Every bench was filled, the air alive with anticipation. This was no longer just a family case. It was a spectacle, a reckoning. Sophia sat rigid at the defense table, her hair immaculate, her suit pressed, but her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She clutched Daniel's arm, though he no longer clung back. His gaze stayed forward, fixed on the bench, his silence no longer hers to command. The judge entered and the gavel struck. We proceed with closing arguments. Stephen rose with calm precision, his voice carrying steady authority. Your Honor, this case is not built on bitterness or invention. It is built on facts. Documents were forged. A signature was falsified. Evidence was hidden. And testimony, both from a child and from a son who finally chose truth, has confirmed a conspiracy to strip a mother of her dignity, her home, and her very name. He paused, letting the weight settle. This is not just one of those family drama stories whispered behind closed doors. This is proof plain and undeniable. A ripple of murmurs filled the benches. I sat taller, my grandson's hand warm in mine. Daniel shifted, guilt carved into the lines of his face. When Sophia rose for her turn, her composure cracked almost instantly. You don't understand, she wailed, her voice shrill. I built this family. I gave Daniel everything. She's jealous, bitter, she poisoned my wedding. You can't let her win. Her words rang false, echoing with desperation. The audience leaned back, some shaking their heads, others smirking. For once, the ridicule was not mine to bear. The judge lifted his hand. Order. This court decides on law, not theatrics. I will deliver judgment. The gavel struck again. Silence fell like a curtain. The judge's gaze swept over the courtroom, lingering on Sophia, then on me. His voice came steady, deliberate, every word weighted like stone. This court finds that the property documents presented were indeed falsified. The signature does not belong to the plaintiff. The evidence shows intent to defraud concealed beneath deception and manipulation. Therefore, the documents are void. Ownership of the Carter home remains with Mrs. Carter. Gasps erupted across the benches, followed swiftly by applause before the bailiff hushed the crowd. I closed my eyes for a moment, the words washing over me like rain after a drought. The house Ernest and I had built together was safe. My name was mine again, the judge continued. Furthermore, the defendant's actions, placing false documents, conspiring to remove the plaintiff from her residence, constitute fraud. This court refers the matter for criminal review. Sophia shot to her feet, her face pale, then flushed with rage. No, you can't do this. I am the victim here. I'm the one humiliated. Don't you see? She's poisoned everyone against me. Her voice cracked, rising higher, desperate and raw. The benches rippled with murmurs, some scoffing, others shaking their heads. A reporter near the front whispered into his recorder, "The bride who forged her way into ruin." Daniel slumped in his seat, his hands covering his face. His silence was no longer complicity, it was surrender. For the first time, he did not reach for her. I sat steady, watching the humiliation I once endured now engulf her. It was not vengeance that filled me, but a heavy, quiet justice. The judge struck his gavel again. Order. This court has spoken. The chamber thundered with whispers. Cameras flashed like lightning, capturing Sophia's downfall. Her sobs echoed as though she were drowning in her own lies. The courtroom emptied slowly, voices buzzing with scandal that would echo far beyond these walls. Reporters clustered near the steps, their headlines already forming. The forged bride, justice for the mother, a wedding of lies. Sophia was led away, her once perfect image in ruins, her sobs swallowed by the clicking of cameras. The humiliation she had crafted for me now cloaked her like a shroud. I stood in the aisle, my grandson clinging to my hand, his small frame steady as a pillar. Daniel approached hesitantly, his face drawn, shame etched deep into the lines around his mouth. "Mother," his voice cracked. He searched my eyes, seeking forgiveness he hadn't earned. There are no words to erase what I've done. I studied him, the son who had abandoned me in silence, who had stood by as Sophia mocked and stripped me of dignity. And yet here he was, trembling, broken, searching for the boy he once was. "You chose her lies over my truth," I said quietly, "but today you chose to speak. That is the first step." He bowed his head, tears falling onto the polished floor. My grandson tugged my sleeve, whispering, "He came back to us, Grandma." Outside, the sky had cleared. Light poured through the courthouse windows, illuminating the marble floor like a benediction. Reporters swarmed as we stepped onto the steps, cameras, flashing microphones thrust forward. Stephen raised his hand to shield me, but I did not hide. I spoke clearly, my voice carrying across the crowd. This fight was not just for me. It was for every mother, silenced every voice, mocked every life, nearly erased by betrayal. From this day forward, I dedicate my strength to helping others find justice. The Carter Foundation, born from Ernest's name, from my scars, would now stand taller. Not only to defend me, but to defend all those buried in lies. The applause rose, not cruel laughter this time, but respect. Neighbors, strangers, even reporters nodded. For the first time, humiliation did not burn my skin. It lifted me higher. I turned to my grandson, squeezing his hand. "We won," I whispered, and in his smile I saw tomorrow. If you believe no mother should ever be silenced by lies, join me here in Voices of Family Betrayal. Subscribe, share, and tell your story. We are stronger together. The courthouse emptied into chaos, reporters chasing sound bites, neighbors lingering with wide eyes, strangers whispering my name as though it had suddenly gained weight. For years I had walked streets where whispers cut like knives. Today those same whispers carried something else: respect. "Did you hear what the judge said?" one voice murmured. She stood up to her own daughter-in-law, and another replied. Imagine the courage. I stepped into the daylight, my grandson's hand warm in mine. Cameras flashed, but I did not hide. For once I welcomed the light. Stephen guided us through the crowd, his expression calm, his presence a shield. "This is only the beginning," he told me quietly. "Sophia will face charges, but your story, it will live beyond this courtroom." That night the house welcomed me back like an old friend. I traced my hand along the doorframe Ernest had once built, the wood worn smooth by decades of touch. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. My chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with gratitude. I moved through each room slowly, as though reacquainting myself with memories nearly stolen. The kitchen where I had stirred soup with trembling hands, the garden Ernest and I had tended, the photographs that had watched silently through years of betrayal. Every corner whispered, "You are home." Daniel arrived later, standing awkwardly on the porch. He did not step inside immediately. His eyes, shadowed with shame, lingered on the floorboards. "Mother," he began, voice low, "I know an apology cannot undo years of silence, but if you'll let me, I want to try." I studied him, the boy who had once clung to my skirts, the man who had once turned his face away while I was humiliated. My heart ached with the weight of both love and anger. "Trying is a beginning," I said softly, "but beginnings are not forgiveness, not yet." His shoulders sagged, but he nodded. "Sometimes truth cuts deeper than lies." The days after the trial blurred into a wave of voices. Letters slipped under my door, neighbors knocking with cautious smiles, even strangers leaving flowers on my porch. Some came to share their own pain: a widow tricked into signing away her land, a daughter abandoned by her siblings, a grandfather cast aside for inheritance. As I listened, I realized this battle was never just mine. It was part of a larger chain, countless family drama stories where betrayal wore familiar faces. Each voice carried a wound, each wound demanded justice. And so the Carter Foundation became more than a dream whispered in Ernest's memory. It became real. We cleared the dining room table, covering it with stacks of letters, case files, and names of volunteers. Stephen offered his legal expertise, neighbors brought their time, and my grandson folded papers beside me with proud determination. The first case we took was a woman from across town, trembling as she clutched faded documents. "They'll call me crazy," she whispered, the same words that had once poisoned my nights. But I held her hand and said, "They called me worse." And yet here I stand. Word spread quickly. What had begun as one woman's humiliation turned into a beacon. Families called, reporters wrote, and the foundation grew with every name we helped protect. At night, when the house fell quiet, I walked to Ernest's portrait. His smile, forever frozen in time, watched over me. I laid my hand against the frame and whispered, "They tried to bury me, Ernest, but instead they planted me. And now we grow." Daniel visited more often, though his presence was a wound still healing. He brought groceries, fixed broken hinges, stood awkwardly in the garden where his father once dug. He spoke little, but his silence was no longer avoidance, it was effort. My grandson clung to him with cautious hope, and though forgiveness had not yet bloomed, I could feel the soil stirring. Weeks passed, and the storm around Sophia's downfall spread beyond our town. Her name appeared in headlines not as a bride but as a fraud. The woman who once basked in attention now avoided it, her humiliation etched into every story printed about her. For me, life became quieter but fuller. The foundation grew stronger, its mission fueled by every voice that came forward. Each time I listened to another story of betrayal, I saw a reflection of my own pain and a reminder of why I could never stop. One evening, I sat on the porch with my grandson, watching the sun dip low over the garden Ernest once tended. Fireflies flickered, children laughed in the distance, and for a moment the world felt whole again. "Grandma," he asked softly, "will Sophia ever say sorry?" I sighed, my gaze drifting to the horizon. "Some people would rather choke on pride than breathe truth. Maybe she never will. But that doesn't matter anymore. What matters is that we spoke, that we fought, that we won." He leaned his head against my arm, and in that simple gesture I felt the healing I had once thought impossible. Inside, Daniel's voice drifted from the kitchen as he washed dishes, a small act, but one that echoed larger than words. He was trying step by step. And though scars remained, scars also meant survival. I looked at the night sky, stars spilling like silver dust, and whispered a vow not just to Ernest, not just to myself, but to every soul listening in silence. We will keep fighting. We will not be silenced. For every betrayal, there will be truth. For every humiliation, there will be justice. The wind stirred the trees as if carrying that vow into the dark, and I knew this was not an ending but another beginning. Because family drama stories never truly end, they continue generation after generation, and through the Carter Foundation, mine would help turn pain into power. If you believe every voice deserves to be heard, join me here in Voices of Family Betrayal. Subscribe, share your story, and let no betrayal ever be buried in silence.